Hello and welcome back to my playthrough of Empire of the Sun, the South Pacific scenario. This is what I'm going to term episode 2, which is going to be game turn 4 in the game. It's actually the second turn of the scenario, but game turn 4 in the overall game, covering September to December 1942. And as far as a recap, I'm not going to go through all the details, but basically the Japanese lost Guadalcanal in the first play, first card play, which is fairly prescribed. And then after that, the Japanese made a very successful attack on the port of Port Moresby and took it by way of some really great dice rolls and by the luck of having the attack be a surprise attack. So the Japanese are doing so far what they're set out to do, which is to stall the Allies in their quest to retake New Guinea and the rest of the Solomon Islands, and to try to gain a port advantage by at least 5 or 6 ports, depending on the game conditions when we get to the end of turn 6. So we are at the beginning of, again, turn 4. We have the CDG solo system being used for the sake of card decisions. It's not telling me which cards to play, but the CDG solo system is helping to narrow my choices down. And I have both of these card displays off to the side. When I make a card play, I will put the card virtually onto the map so you can see it. Like before, I will, when it's appropriate, I will do some explaining of the rules and tactics and strategies as I best understand them. Again, caveat is that I do not pretend to be an expert at this game. By far, I'm not. And please feel free to comment, point out anything that I'm doing wrong, or suggestions, tips, etc. I'm always happy to learn, especially from those who are more experienced at the game. I will do all my dice rolls over here in the dice roll tray. It's sometimes a little hard to see depending on how the light is shining on the dice, and sometimes the camera goes out of focus, so I do apologize in advance if it's a little wonky at times. But that having been said, we are set up for the first play of turn 4, and that happens to be the Japanese. And so in order to go ahead and determine what card I will play, I'm going to go ahead and roll this Fate die, which is part of the CDG solo system. And I'll roll this up right now. And we have C, D, and E. Now in C, D, and E, and essentially this is very flexible. I can play cards that are in slots C, D, and E. I get to flip up the cards if they're face down in C, D, and E, and play them for any allowable purpose. Or I can also play a future offensives card if I want to, and I do actually have a future offensives card. So it's actually quite flexible. So I'm going to go ahead and get those cards flipped over, take a look at them, make a decision, and come back. All right, I've looked over my options, and while I had many options to choose from, and I did have actually a pretty decent military ops card, it had some limitations to it to play as the event that didn't feel ideal, especially considering the fact that the Japanese and the Allies, for that matter, are in inter-service rivalry. And given that, what I've decided to do is I'm going to go ahead and play this War in Europe card for the event. And this has one nice thing in playing at 1942 is that it does push over the War in Europe status over by 2 spaces. And I don't know when I might be able to play this for the event in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and play that, and at least it'll give the Allies something to think about in terms of the war in Europe, potentially also leading to delays and so on and so forth for Allied units. And I've done that, and the marker has moved over automatically thanks to the Vassal module, which is really awesome. And this card is now out of the game. And now we flip over to the Allied side. So similarly, I'm going to roll the fate die for the Allies and see what's going up. Well, there we go. One turn deserves another. That is C, D, and E. Blurry, but nonetheless, it's C, D, E. So similarly, the Allies get the same options, C, D, or E, or the future operations card. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the cards over and do some decision making. Okay, so I have studied the cards available to me, and I've decided to go ahead and play the card out of the Future Offensives queue, and that is Operation Cherry Blossom. I'll highlight it there. And I'm going to play it for the event. And interestingly enough, just because it works out, I'm actually going to be playing it for its historical purpose, which is the landing at Bougainville. So what I'm going to try to do is take Bougainville from the Japanese. I'm going to activate naval units, and I'm going to consider those activations. I'm going to consider headquarter choice and get back to you with hopefully a plan in place. Okay, so I've decided on something. I cannot promise that this is going to be a good move for the Allies. This could be dicey depending on how the Japanese are able to react. I've activated the Southwest Pacific headquarters. We've got all three carriers, plus the battleship Washington and the 2nd Marine Division coming ashore in Bougainville. We've got the 1st Marine Air Wing that's going to also lend some support to the operation. And then I considered trying to screen the fleet up here at Truk, but that's murderous for any naval unit, and I don't have an expendable naval unit necessarily for just that purpose. So I'm kind of rolling the dice a little bit, and instead I've chosen to do a similar screening operation, but a much more safe screening operation by sending the North Carolina into rubble and at least keeping those units busy. So it does mean that the Japanese, depending on their reaction, of course, have the entire fleet up here at Truk, plus their air units. So I've looked at the Japanese hand, and per the CDG Solar System guidelines and rules, any available reaction card that is visible, in other words, if it's visible, it's available, is eligible to play. Now, it turns out I have a couple of reaction cards. I've got a couple of sub cards, and I could actually play those sub cards, but that won't change the intelligence condition, which is currently surprise because that's the default air naval intelligence condition. So it's going to necessitate a successful dice roll. This is a fairly large operation, but it doesn't quite have the highest event value. So I need to roll a 5 or less, but I get a modifier of -2. Basically, it means I roll 7 or less and I'm able to react. So really the only time that I will not be able to react and it would stay surprise attack is if I roll an 8 or a 9. Now this dice has been rolling a lot of 9s. So this is the time that I do not want to roll a 9 for the Japanese if you are supporting the Japanese position in this regard. So let's see if the Japanese can smell the operation and react to it. Okay, so I rolled a 6. And so the Japanese do see what's coming, and they're able to then mount at least a basic reaction to this operation. I'm going to go ahead and study my options and come back with a reaction. All right. So this is going to be fun. This may not go well for the Allies if there's some bad dice rolls. So I was able to activate 6 units because I activated the combined fleet headquarters up here in Palau. I was able to activate the Shokaku to contribute its battle strength to battle hex A, as well as the 25th, 21st, and 26th bomber units. And then I was able to sail the Yamato and the Hai into Bougainville to engage at the surface level. Now, this is a big attack. One cool thing, though, is that now, prior to the offensive beginning and the combat phase, I'm able to play this submarine attack card. So this card allows me to choose a naval unit that's engaged in the battle and make a dice roll and see if I can apply a step loss as a result of a submarine torpedo attack. So I'm going to decide what unit I want to do and then make that roll. Okay, so I'm going to go after the Washington with my submarine attack card. If I roll 0 to 4, it'll apply a step loss to the Washington, and if I roll 5 to 9, it won't. So here we go. The Japanese submarine attack is successful. This is bad for the Allies. That's a 4. So before the battle begins, the Washington will take a step loss. And now we're going to resolve the combat. This is the combat resolution of Battle Hex A over the island of Bougainville. And it's not looking too well for the Allies. The Japanese were able to bring in 89 combat factors against the Allies who, after the successful submarine attack on the Washington, are down to 42 points. So it's about a 2-to-1 ratio here in terms of combat factors. I'm going to roll the dice, and we're going to see what happens. Okay, so this is really interesting. A 1 and a 1. That's unusual. Strangely enough, and I will tell you this, I did some math wrong in a previous take, and I had rolled 2 9s. And I decided to redo the take, and now I just rolled 2 1s. It's really uncanny. I don't know the odds of rolling double 9s followed by double 1s, but I rolled double 1s, and it's still going to result in damage for the Allies and the Japanese. So based on that, it's 11 hit points by the Allies scored against their 23 hit points by the Japanese. So if I look around the map and I see my 11 hit points and where I can apply them, it means that I can take out one of these air units, which is not a bad result for the Allies entirely. And I think I'm going to knock out the 21st Air Wing here. Not eliminated, but give it a step loss. Now for the Japanese, they did 23 points of damage. Again, same rules apply. They've got to apply hits against full value units first, and that would mean the Submarine Air Wing is going to take 10 of those units. So I'm going to flip that guy over. That's 10 units. So that leaves me now with 13 points left. And what it actually does mean is that I can sink a carrier. The carriers are all at 12 value. And I think since the Lexington is actually in port, I will go ahead and sink the Lexington. So all in all, it could have been much worse for the Allies. The Allies actually could have been decimated. And because I rolled the 1s and not the 9s, I'm just going to take that as kind of serendipity in my failed take prior to this one. Very interesting. Now here's something fun. I actually had a second submarine reaction card face up. And because you can play up to 3 reaction cards in any given offensive, I will be able to play this one. This one actually takes place after the battle. So during an offensive, at the end of all combat, you get to roll a dice and pick a unit and apply perhaps a step or 2 steps. I'm going to go ahead and choose which one I want to apply and get back to you. I've chosen to go after the North Carolina. So I have a pretty good chance of doing some damage here. 2 is the roll. And so the North Carolina will take a step loss. It took some damage. And now that resolves the submarine attack. And I will go ahead and do some post-battle movement. So now we've done post-battle movement. And also, if you're wondering what happened to the invasion, well, for new players of the game, the air-naval combat must be successful in order for the ground combat to continue if it's an amphibious invasion. And in this case, it's determined by the number of remaining combat factors. And the Japanese had still, even after the reductions, they still had an overwhelming advantage in terms of remaining combat factors. So the invasion was turned away. And as a matter of fact, one thing I have to do is I have to use a amphibious shipping point. Okay, so that was a used and now lost amphibious shipping point. So now we have the map after this big event that occurred over Bougainville. And now we're going to phase over to the Japanese card play. Acting as the Japanese, we'll roll the fate die and see what card is available or what cards are available. All right, I have rolled A, B. So what that basically means is I flip over slots A and B, I examine the cards, and with that I can play A or B for any allowable purpose. So I'll find out what I'm going to play. All right, I have chosen the card from the two available options, and I've chosen Ichi-Go, and I'm going to choose this actually to play as the event. Now, part of this is because I'm trying to put pressure on the Allies because they've got the war in Europe marker now moved over a couple slots. All of these do play into both operations of the Allies, potentially with replacements and reinforcements and political will and stuff like this. So it's really just meant to keep throwing obstacles in front of the Allies so that they aren't focusing on taking ports. So I'm going to go ahead and play this as the event. And I get to move now the China marker towards collapse. So that concludes the Japanese card play. Move the cards remaining. They've got 2 cards remaining now, but they still have their future offensives card sitting in the queue. And I'm going to phase it over to the Allies. So the Allies, similarly, will roll fate die and see what comes up. And they rolled D and E. And it's like A and B, except now I get to choose from the cards in slots D and E, and I will take a look and come back with a decision. So for the Allies, I've decided to play this card, PT Boats, but I'm going to play it for Ops. And if you're wondering, the event of PT Boats is a good event, but in this particular case, it doesn't really serve me to just play it for the event and not actually do anything. So I'm going to play it for Ops. I'll come back with a plan. So what I did do, I had thought about moving some air units around, but actually what's important to me, at least from the Allied perspective, is to try to get some ground forces shipped up into New Guinea that I can start moving along the ground and to get some powerful ones up there. So because of the stacking limits, I can only ship 1 ground unit into Gili-Gili. So now I'm kind of maxed out because I've got the air wing and then I have the 1212 Marine unit. And because of inter-service rivalry, I can't sort of swap guys around. So I sent the 14th Army into Gili-Gili by strategic movement, so there's no amphibious shipping point restriction or cost. And then also similarly, using strategic movement, I sent the 1st Army into Cairns to replace the 14th Army that was stationed there. Okay, so we're phasing over to the Japanese player, which is me since I'm both sides. And I'm going to roll the fate die again. For reference, we have 3 cards remaining for the Allies, and we have 2 cards remaining for the Japanese, plus they still have a card in the future offensives queue. So let's roll the fate die and see what we can do. Okay, so I have this funny E with the less than sign, is that it allows me to flip cards, have 2 cards that are face up, and then I can play any of those face-up cards for an event, or play the lowest valued ops card. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that and then come back with a decision. So I've decided on playing the Big Tokyo Express operation. This I'm playing for its event. It was one of the two cards that were face up to me that I wanted to play as an event. The other card I want to hold on to. The caveat here is that I can only activate one ground unit. So what I'm going to do, I think, is similarly to what the Americans did. I'm going to actually ship a ground unit to another port, get a ground unit a little closer to where I feel the ground unit will be useful. All right, so what I've done is I've shipped the Japanese 18th Army into Leh, just down the coast where they were positioned. They were positioned previously in Wewak. And that was by strategic movement, so I don't burn a amphibious shipping point in this particular case, but it does count as a ground unit for the purposes of activation, so that's my only ground unit that I can use per the card restrictions. So then I activated South Seas. It doesn't really matter because I don't have too many units I can activate in the Army side of things, but I did activate the 3 Army air units, the T Corps, and the 6th and the 7th Air Wings of the Army Air Wings. And what they're going to do is do a strafing and bombing run on Gili-Gili. And so now we get to see what the Allied reaction will be, if any. So as it would turn out, in the card display, there was one Allied reaction card available to play, and that happens to be the intelligence Australian Coastwatchers card, reaction card. And since I did activate air units, I can operate this card, and it will automatically turn this offensive into an intercept. It also has the virtue of playing as the event. It allows me to draw in another strategy card, which means I don't burn through one of my other cards. So let me go ahead and determine the Allied reaction. Okay, to kind of balance the odds, the Allies decided to react with one of their carriers, that is the Wasp, down here. And so the Wasp is coming in to help lend some support with the Enterprise and the 2nd Marine Air Wing in Gili-Gili against the 3 Army Air Wings that will be attacking. So it's 24 versus 24. And now I get to roll the dice. So let's see what happens in the resolution of this combat. Okay, not a whole lot. 3 versus 0. So what this is going to result in, as far as the offensive, is 12 hit points for the Japanese versus 6 hit points for the Allies. Now, the Allies, unfortunately, will not be able to do any damage against the Japanese air wings. The 12 hit points, however, will be able to flip over one of those units. Because I happen to have one full strength unit, that is the 2nd Marine Air Wing, that's the one that's going to take the result of the damage. And I'm going to flip that over. That's 10 points. That'll leave me with 2 as a remainder, and nothing happens there. So the Japanese were fairly successful. It wasn't really an attempt to, destroy Gili-Gili, because I just didn't have that much firepower, but it was an attempt to try to just whittle down the Allies a little bit and accomplish the goal of moving one of my armies a little closer to the action. And now it is time to engage in post-battle movement. So post-battle movement has been completed. It was pretty simple. I just repositioned the Japanese air wings, make sure that my coverage of zones of influence was in good shape, and I sent the Wasp back to Efate to cover that region, and now we will phase over to the Allies. Here we go. Going to roll the fate die and see what's in store for the Allies. Okay, so we've got A and B. And with that, I study slots A and B and see what I'm going to do. I'll come back in a minute. All right, I'm going to play Tornado Task Force, and I'm going to play this for ops. And again, my goal is also to start moving forces around and start a little bit of forward momentum. The plan was try to ship more men and material into New Guinea and to basically move by ground in as much as possible. So what I've done is I've actually activated the ANZAC headquarters, which gave me the option to also activate Australian units. And what I'm doing now is I have shipped the 3rd Australian Army unit into Gili-Gili by strategic movement, and then did a ground move of the 14th Army into this hex 3923 that sits between Port Moresby and Gili-Gili. I do realize that they're vulnerable, but this is the price of trying to get something done in war. So that'll conclude the Allied turn, and now we're going to phase back over to the Japanese. We are again ready to roll the fate die, this time for the Japanese. And the Japanese have 1 card remaining, plus the Future Offensives card, and the Allies have 2 cards remaining in their hands. So we'll roll the fate die and see what happens. Okay, so this is a pretty good roll, A, B, or C. And with A, B, C, I can reveal if there are any face down cards in slots A, B, or C to reveal them. And then I can play A, B, or C for any allowable purpose, or I could play the Future Offensives card for its event if I chose to do so. So let me do that and get back to you with a card play. So I've decided to play this War in Europe card, and I'm going to play it for the event. Since it came up, and this is the last card play of 1942, and it gives me the maximum value of being able to shift that War in Europe marker over two spaces. And it's really going to put pressure on the Allies, because not only is the war in Europe going badly for them, which is going to result in delays and so forth, it's also increases the chance of success by way of, for the Japanese, by way of victory points. So I'm going to go ahead and play this as the event. So things are going badly in Europe, and the Allies are going to have to deal with that, at least off map, off board. So that finishes the Japanese turn, and that happens to be their last card. So the Allies actually have 2 cards remaining, so they're going to get 2 consecutive plays. So I'm going to roll the fate die now for the Allies. And that is the E with the less than value sign. So let me take a look and come back to you. Okay, interestingly enough, we have another War in Europe card, but this time we have an Allied War of Europe card that was available. So I'm going to play this War in Europe. The disadvantage here is that early in the War in Europe cards are more powerful for the Japanese. And then later in the war, they become much more powerful for the Allies, you know, as the tide shifts over in Europe. So it is a major Allied victory, but basically it's a counteroffensive against these fairly significant offensives that have been occurring here in the late half of 1942, the fall of 1942. So we'll go ahead and play that. That's going to at least recover that War in Europe marker. Is going to move back into level 1. So we're going to play this as an event, and that shifts the War in Europe marker back over by 1. And then that leads us to now the final card play of this turn. So we must be in December, probably nearing Christmas time. And now we have this funny looking card, which is, you can't see it there. It's C with double exclamation points. So in this particular card play, we reveal what is in slot C, and you can play slot C for any allowable purpose or any lowest valued ops that's visible. So let me do that and come back to you. All right, another good card for the Allies. So this is going to enter service rivalry, at least until it changes again. There is a Japanese card in the deck that can cause a dispute again, but I think this is a good card to play going into 1943 as the event, and it happened to be on slot C. And so let's go ahead and play this as the event. And that's going to automatically flip over the inter-service rivalry marker to strategic agreement, and all of the headquarters are now in the strategic agreement. And that gives the Allies now, at least again until it changes, it gives the Allies a lot of flexibility because they're now able to activate both Army and Navy units. So that concludes the Allied final card play, and now we're going to go into end of turn cleanup. All right, we ended turn 4. We entered a new year, 1943. We're beginning the January to April turn, which is turn 5. We'll play that in the next episode, but just setting us up here, we have brought in our reinforcements and our replacements. I did do the submarine roll for the Allies to see whether or not strategic warfare was effective. I did roll a 9, so that results in no reduction for the Japanese. So both the Allies and the Japanese have 4 cards now in their deck, and the Japanese still have a future offensives card to play sitting. It actually happens to be General Adachi. And because of the war in Europe, the reinforcements that were due to arrive this turn are now delayed. So they're in the delayed box you can see down here. They'll be eligible to be deployed next turn. And then in terms of replacements, the Lexington has come back into play. And also in terms of Japanese reinforcements, the Japanese had no replacements that they could use in the air or navy or ground, but they did get the 28th Air Force unit as a reinforcement. And finally, the Allies were able to top up the First Army to full capacity as part of replacements for their 1 ground unit replacement schedule. And that concludes the turn 4, and we're set up for turn 5. And next episode, we will play through turn 5 and see if the Allies can't begin to make progress. I should also point out the U.S. political will did drop by 1 because the Allies did not make their requisite progress of war, which is 2. So this turn, of course, they will endeavor to make progress of war, and the Japanese will endeavor to stop them. So we'll see you next time.